It was almost midnight when Liam's old sedan sputtered and died on a lonely stretch of country road. The engine coughed once, twice, then fell silent, leaving him in absolute darkness except for the pale glow of the moon overhead. He sighed heavily, gripping the steering wheel as if that alone could will the car back to life. No such luck. With a muttered curse, he tried the ignition again. Click, click, nothing. The battery was dead. Liam stepped out into the cool night air. The silence around him was unsettling. No cars passed by, no crickets chirped, no distant dogs barked, only the sound of the wind brushing through the trees. He pulled out his phone, but the screen mocked him with two dreaded words: no signal. Great, just great. Scanning the horizon, he spotted something faintly glowing in the distance, a soft orange light, maybe from a window. It was about a mile away, maybe less. With no better option, Liam grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment, locked the car, and started walking toward it. The gravel crunched beneath his boots with every step. It was the only sound he heard, and for the first 10 minutes, he tried to convince himself that everything was fine. But then, he heard it. Another set of footsteps, softer, lighter, but definitely there. They followed his rhythm. When he stopped, they stopped. When he walked faster, they did too. Hello, he called into the darkness, his voice trembling more than he'd like to admit. Nothing answered, just the whisper of wind through the trees. He shook his head, trying to laugh it off. Probably his imagination, probably an animal, but deep down, something didn't feel right. The light grew brighter as he approached. It came from an old farmhouse, its paint peeled and windows boarded, leaning slightly to one side like it had been forgotten by time. The porch creaked under his weight as he climbed the steps, and he hesitated before knocking on the door. Hello, he called. My car broke down, can I use your phone? No answer. The door wasn't closed all the way. It hung loosely on one hinge, swaying slightly in the breeze. Liam pushed it open and stepped inside, the floor groaning under his boots. The air was cold and stale, smelling of dust and damp wood. Cobwebs hung like curtains from the ceiling, and faint shapes of broken furniture loomed in the dark corners. Anyone here? He tried again. Still nothing. The glow he'd seen from the road flickered faintly from the next room. He walked toward it, each step making the house seem to breathe and moan around him. When he reached the doorway, his heart skipped. On a small wooden table sat a single lit candle. Next to it was a framed photograph of him. Liam's breath caught in his throat. It was him standing beside his broken car, wearing the same clothes he was wearing now. His face was turned slightly over his shoulder, as if he had just sensed something behind him. Below the photo, scrawled in shaky handwriting on a scrap of yellowed paper, were 3 chilling words. Don't turn around. His body went rigid. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to run, but he couldn't. The air behind him felt colder suddenly, heavy and close. And then he heard it, breathing. Slow, deep, too close, too human. Liam's mind raced. Someone had been following him. Someone had taken that photo. Someone was standing right behind him. His trembling hand reached for the candle, as if its tiny light could protect him. Who's there? He whispered, voice barely audible. The breathing stopped. Silence swallowed the room. Liam swallowed hard and, against every screaming instinct in his body, turned around. The hallway was empty. No figure, no shadow, nothing. But the air still felt wrong, charged, alive, like something unseen was inches from his face. He backed away slowly, refusing to blink. That's when the door he'd entered through slammed shut with a deafening bang. The candle flickered violently, nearly going out. And from somewhere deep within the house, beyond the dark hallway and the rotting walls, came a faint but distinct sound, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. Liam bolted for the door, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Something was holding it shut from the other side. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just beyond the room he was in. Then, just above the sound of his panicked breathing, a voice rasped from the darkness. You shouldn't have turned around. Liam spun back toward the candle, but it was too late. It had gone out, and in the suffocating blackness that followed, he realized with bone-deep certainty that he was no longer alone in the house. Maya had always loved the quiet. After years of living with roommates and chaotic neighbors, her small 12th-floor apartment finally offered her the peace she craved. It was a modest place, with creaky wooden floors and an ancient elevator that groaned like an old man, but to her, it was perfect. Nights were her favorite. She'd curl up on the couch with a cup of tea and a good book, the city's hum faint and distant below. This particular night, however, felt different. A heavy rain drummed against the windows, and the wind howled through the alleyways. The hallway lights outside her door flickered every few minutes, casting eerie shadows across her living room. Maya shrugged it off as just another stormy night and pulled her blanket tighter around herself. At exactly 2:14 a.m., a soft tap, 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 echoed through the apartment. She frowned and glanced up from her book. It came again, rhythmic and deliberate, from the direction of her front door. Her heart gave a small jolt. Nobody visited her this late. Carefully, she set her book aside and tiptoed toward the door. The sound continued. Tap, 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 slow and patient. Holding her breath, Maya pressed her eye to the peephole. The hallway outside was empty. Just peeling wallpaper and flickering lights stretching into darkness. "Hello," she called, her voice thin and shaky. Silence. After a moment, she shook her head and stepped back. "Probably pipes," she muttered, trying to laugh at herself. Old building, weird noises. She returned to the couch, but the unease in her chest wouldn't fade. 20 minutes passed. The storm outside raged harder. Just as her eyelids began to droop, the sound came again, this time louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. Maya jumped to her feet. "Who's there?" she shouted. Again, no answer. She pressed her face to the peephole, nothing. The hallway was as empty as before. Something wasn't right. She double-checked the deadbolt, then slid the security chain into place for good measure. Satisfied the door was secure, she turned off the lights in the living room and headed for her bedroom, deciding sleep was the best way to shake off her nerves. That's when her phone buzzed. The sudden vibration made her heart leap. She grabbed it quickly, hoping it was a friend or a random notification. Instead, she froze. The screen displayed a text from an unknown number. "Why won't you let me in?" Maya's throat went dry. Her fingers hovered over the screen, unsure of how to respond, or if she even should. Before she could decide, another message appeared. "I'm already inside." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She stared at the words, rereading them over and over. It had to be a prank. It had to be. She looked around the room, scanning every corner. Everything looked normal. Doors and windows were locked. She was alone, wasn't she? Slowly, she moved through the apartment, checking. Each room. The bathroom, empty. The kitchen, empty. The closet, nothing. She was about to laugh at herself when she noticed something that hadn't been there before, wet footprints. They started at the balcony door, still locked, and trailed across the living room floor, leading straight into her bedroom. Maya's breath hitched. Each print was shaped like a bare human foot, glistening faintly under the weak light. Her hands trembled as she picked up a kitchen knife from the counter. "Hello," she whispered, barely louder than the rain outside. "Who's there?" No response. Step by step, she followed the trail. The footprints stopped just inside the doorway of her bedroom. Her chest tightened as she peeked inside. The lights were off. The room was bathed in darkness. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, she saw it. In the far corner of the room, half hidden by shadows, someone was standing. It wasn't a trick of the light. It wasn't her imagination. A tall, pale figure stood perfectly still, facing her. Its eyes, wide, hollow, and empty, seemed to glow faintly in the dark. Maya's scream caught in her throat. She stumbled backward, the knife clattering to the floor. When she blinked, the figure was gone. The room was empty again. No footprints, no shadow, nothing. Like it had never been there. Her breathing came fast and ragged as she backed into the hallway. Maybe she was dreaming. Maybe she was losing her mind. Then, from just behind her ear, so close she could feel the cold breath on her skin, a voice whispered. "Next time, open the door." Maya spun around, slashing the air with shaking hands, but there was no one there. The apartment was silent once more, except for the storm outside and the pounding of her heart. She didn't sleep that night. She sat curled up on the couch until dawn, every light in the apartment burning bright. And though she told herself it had been a nightmare, a trick of her imagination, she never forgot the last thing she saw before the morning sun rose, a single wet footprint, fresh and glistening, appearing slowly in the middle of her living room floor. Ethan had been working the night shift at the old Rutherford warehouse for almost 3 years, and nothing much ever happened. It was a lonely job, 8 hours of patrolling dusty aisles, checking padlocks, and watching flickering security monitors. Most nights, the most exciting thing he saw was a stray raccoon trying to sneak inside. But that night, something was different. The shift started like any other. He made coffee in the break room, scanned the security feed, and began his rounds. But from the very start, the warehouse felt off. The air was colder than usual, biting through his uniform. The silence felt heavier too, pressing down on him like a weight. Normally, the place echoed faintly with the hum of machinery or the distant buzz of lights. Tonight, it was dead silent, like the building itself was holding its breath. At around 3:07 a.m., as he flipped through the security monitors, Ethan noticed movement on camera 12. A shape, small and fast, slipped between two shelves in a section that was supposed to be completely empty. He squinted, leaning closer to the screen. It was too quick to make out clearly, but it definitely wasn't an animal. It looked human, probably some kid who broke in, he muttered, grabbing his flashlight and radio. Still, a chill crawled up his spine. He entered the darkened storage bay cautiously. The rows of metal shelves stretched endlessly in both directions, casting long shadows under the dim emergency lights. "Hello," he called. "This is private property. If anyone's in here, come out now." Only silence answered. He walked deeper, his footsteps echoing eerily. That's when he noticed the temperature dropping. It wasn't his imagination. His breath was now visible in small white clouds. A faint smell of rust and something metallic hung in the air. At the end of the aisle, his flashlight beam caught something on the shelf, a small, smeared handprint. Red, sticky, fresh, and far too small to belong to an adult. Ethan's pulse quickened. "Who's here?" he shouted again, louder this time. No response. The sound of something moving came from the next aisle. Soft, light footsteps. He turned the corner, shining his light ahead, but saw only empty shelves stretching into darkness. As he moved closer, the footsteps stopped. The silence was now deafening. Back in the control room, camera 12 flickered again. The figure had returned, only now it was closer to the main office. Ethan hurried back toward the center of the building, his boots crunching on the cold concrete floor. When he reached the office, the door was slightly ajar. He was certain he'd closed it before. Inside, everything looked normal. Except for one thing. On the desk, where his logbook had been, lay a single piece of yellowed paper. It hadn't been there before. Written across it in crude, uneven handwriting were the words, "I never left." Ethan's heart began to hammer. "Who's playing games?" he shouted, spinning around. "Show yourself." The overhead lights suddenly flickered, then died, plunging the warehouse into absolute darkness. His radio crackled and went silent. Even the distant hum of the backup generators stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. He switched on his flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the pitch black. As he swept the light across the room, he froze. Dozens of small figures stood at the edge of the beam. Motionless, silent, surrounding him. They weren't adults, they were children. Or at least, they looked like children. Their faces were pale and hollow, their eyes black and empty. Some wore tattered clothes, some had blood-stained hands. And all of them stared straight at him. "What the hell?" Ethan whispered, stumbling backward. "Stay away from me." None of them moved, until one did. A small girl stepped forward, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, eyes fixed on him. When she spoke, her voice was colder than the night air. "We've been waiting for you." Ethan's flashlight flickered, and in that brief darkness, the figures vanished. When the light steadied again, the aisle was empty. Heart racing, he bolted for the exit. But the path seemed different. No matter how far he ran, every turn led him deeper into the maze of shelves. It was as if the building itself was shifting, trapping him inside. Then he heard them again. Tiny footsteps, laughter, whispers too faint to understand. The air grew colder with every step, and just as he turned another corner, the light caught a face inches from his own, white eyes, wide and unblinking. He screamed. The next morning, when the day shift arrived, the warehouse was silent. Ethan was gone. His radio lay shattered on the floor near camera 12. His flashlight was still on, rolling gently in a slow circle. And on the security desk, smeared in what looked like blood, was a fresh handprint, small, childlike, and unmistakably new. And on the monitor, though the building was empty, camera 12 still showed movement. Small, darting figures slipping between the shelves. Watching, waiting. No one ever worked the night shift there again.